We now finish up David Hume's theory of causation. So he takes this custom that we create, this habituation, to be a great guide of human life. Why is it so important? Well, his first reason is that it's the only principle that makes experience useful, because we're able to, engage in this prediction of the future. And without it, he believes experience wouldn't be useful, because if one thing happened and then that was it, all we could say is that happened, and then we could say again that happened, that happened, that happened, and that wouldn't be particularly useful. It also, as part of this, makes us expect that future events will be similar to those of the past. A good example would be, say, going to cook a meal today. You'd expect that if you take, say, a pizza and put it in the oven and set the temperature, that it will cook. I mean, things can go wrong. Power could go out, the setting could be wrong, etc. But we expect the future to resemble the past. And if we didn't have that expectation, we wouldn't know how to, prepare our pizza. We'd have to put the pizza, tried in various places every time, like maybe in this refrigerator thing, or maybe in this thing, or maybe in that thing, or whatever. And I mean, it seems silly, but we do rely on this custom to make predictions about the future. Hume also asserts that without this custom, we'd be ignorant of every matter of fact beyond what we immediately have present to our memory and senses. Wouldn't be able to extend beyond them. So, in the case of the senses, for example, without this notion, you wouldn't be able to claim to, well, you can't really claim to know, but you wouldn't claim to have this, any foundation for believing that what you can't see beyond the walls is still there. Also, kind of continuing with the cooking point, without this custom, we wouldn't know how to adjust means to end or produce any effect. So we wouldn't know how to, for example, cook our pizza, or cool a drink, or put out a fire. Everything would be new. It'd be, imagine living without any capacity for this ability to adjust means to ends, and one would not probably last very long. And as he says, without this, there'd be an end of all action, because you really couldn't be very effective at doing things. Just take a simple case of trying to prepare dinner without any custom of cause and effect. And he also believes that there'd be an end of speculation. Now, being an historian, or was, because he's dead now in fact he's history, he was very interested in distant times and places. And he claims, doing a bit of history, that conclusions from experience about matters of fact in distant times and places and distant ages must come from a fact present to the senses or memory. He's an empiricist. Now, a good question to be is, well, how would you have something present to the senses or memory about places, distant places and times? Well, in a way, distant places, so I guess you could have been there yourself, but if, to use a modern example, if you're trying to draw conclusions about, a country far away, say Iran or Russia, or distant times, like back, in the time of the pharaohs, or, back, 5000 BC. So he claims that whatever conclusion we draw with these matters of fact must come from something present to our senses or memory. So how do we do that? Well, the obvious answer is this. We learn about events of former times from history text, like the one he wrote. And we carry our inferences from one testimony to another until, hopefully, we reach the eyewitnesses. So the idea, essentially, is we have this, chain of testimony going back to the past. And although he's not laying out like a very detailed theory of history, he is laying out like this kind of notion of how you have to ultimately tie things back to the primary sources. So, without a fact present to the memory or senses, our reasoning, he claims, would be purely hypothetical, and we cannot have any knowledge of real existence. So, really important stuff. Now, he brings up here an infinite regress argument. So, suppose you're asked why you believe a particular matter of fact. So, I mean, let's take a hopefully non-controversial example that the pyramids exist. Now, of course, you need to provide another fact connected to it. Someone says, well, how do you know they exist? And you might say, well, I've seen pictures of them, and there are these books about them, and there'd be no reason why anybody would lie about them, and you might have even been to them yourself. And so, but of course, you keep having to provide a fact. You could also use an example like claims made in politics. I won't make a particular one, but you could have a claim about, that some candidate did something, bad. And then someone might say, well, why do you believe that? And then if you give a reason, they might ask, well, why do you believe that? And then if you give a reason, they would say, why do you believe that? Now, one option here, of course, is to go into the infinite regress given by the skeptics, which is an epistemic problem. Namely, if for every reason you have to give a reason, this goes off to infinity and you'll have no reasons, so you can't claim to have any knowledge. But Hume just simply sort of shuts it down by saying, this can't go on to infinity, for the obvious reason that you just end up in total skepticism. So he claims, when you believe something, it must end in a fact present to memory or senses, or you have to accept the belief lacks a foundation. And so, in this regard, he's being kind of skeptical, and the way we often use the term popularly instead of philosophically, the idea being that when someone says, I'm skeptical about that, they want reasons. And so, essentially what he's saying is, if you can't draw that claim back to something that is present to memory or senses, that is, say, a foundation, then it doesn't have a foundation. And this would be one way you could look at, say, a conspiracy theory. One thing that would undermine a conspiracy theory is if you keep tracing it back and it just sort of, literally vanishes. You find no foundation to that. So his second conclusion ends up being this: that all belief of matter of fact, about what exists and what occurs, he claims, comes from an object present to memory or senses, and this customary conjunction between X and Y. We'll just have those as variables standing for two different objects or events. So, if X appears to the senses, custom leads the mind to expect Y, and to believe that Y exists and will be discovered. So, as an example, if we believe that taking a match and burning match and touching it to flammable paper ignites the paper, then if we see the match heading towards the paper, we expect the paper to catch on fire, and we believe that that will happen. And he claims this belief is a necessary result of placing the mind in such circumstances. Let's say you're thinking about it and you have this transition. And he claims that this is an operation of the soul, as unavoidable as feeling love when benefited or hatred when injured, which of course those could be debated. And he claims, again kind of closing out in psychology, that all of these operations are natural instinct, which no reasoning can produce or prevent. So essentially, again, he's doing psychology. He's not saying that somehow we have this special faculty of reason that can scan out the necessary causal connections, and we're seeing the matrix, to use a metaphor. Essentially, he claims it's a natural instinct. You just fall into this habit, and he says essentially it kind of works. So, is there causation? Well, on one hand, Hume says we just do so. We just do all this stuff naturally, without reason. And if we actually try to find it empirically, we never find it. So on hand, kind of no, but it seems to do a lot of stuff. And hence it's no surprise that our good dead friend Immanuel Kant saw this as kind of a mess and decided to sort it out a bit. So that takes us to the end of David Hume's theory of causation, and essentially the psychology of how that works. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.